Hey, it's Dre with Obsidian Wisdom. Welcome to another Retirement Readiness Thursday. Today we will go through a FIRE plan. So, for those that don't know, FIRE is financial independence, um, retire early. Yeah, I was like, I don't know why I was thinking the E wasn't how it ended, but financial independence, retire early. Normally, this is where people are like, I think I want to retire in my mid 40s, early 50s, probably my like mid 50s, but we're definitely thinking earlier than the traditional 65 Medicare and Social Security type of plans. When we're talking about the FIRE plan, we focus a lot more on income strategies because, for example, you can't just touch your you can, but you generally don't want to just touch your 401ks and 403bs and other pre-tax retirement plans because they have penalties before 59 and a half. And so you don't want to have to be paying Uncle Sam any more than you absolutely have to. So then the question becomes, is it actually possible for me to retire early without touching the accounts that will be penalized, and I'll be able to maintain some sort of a lifestyle so that I can enjoy myself? And we'll go through a handful of those type of strategies that you would end up using when we're talking about income planning. And so if you find that few of these make sense for you, feel free to take them, put them in your own retirement plan. But we're going to focus on that idea first and foremost. Now, one of the cool things that I like, and I will show it to you as we go through the plan, is really the idea of making sure that I have my multiple streams of income set up. And I'm someone who always preaches that. The numbers show that 65% of self-made millionaires have at least three streams of income, that the top 10% of wealth in the United States owns 90% of the stock market, like 90, something like that, where you're sitting there like, that's a crazy number. And I'm like, I know. And so I'm definitely someone who likes to talk about the idea of purchasing our freedom and being able to maintain it. So when we're talking about retiring in our 50s, we're really going to be focusing first and foremost on where the income is, how much I actually have, and then we'll go through some of those income planning techniques that you'll need. So let's start with what their overall plan was when we first started. So right, we had like 70,000 in savings. Diego had 380,000 in his own 401k. So currently, I believe we're 40. Diego's 45 and Elena is 43. So Diego had 380 in there. Elena had 210 in hers. They both contributed to the Roth combined 90,000. HSA, they have 18,000 that's set aside. That's your health savings account. We'll talk about that a little bit. And then in their joint investments, that's what your taxable account is. You may hear it as a brokerage account or something like that. It just means that it's money from your regular bank account. It's already been taxed at least once, and they have 450 in that. You will find that a lot of times, if you're someone that is planning on retiring early, you're going to generally have a little bit more money inside of your non-retirement accounts because Uncle Sam is saying, I don't want you to retire before 59 and a half. And I know you and I are like, well, why would you do that, Uncle Sam? That's kind of messed up. And it's true. Uncle Sam spends a lot of economic strategy. Like I talk a little bit about things like social engineering and how things are designed for certain things to happen. And you can see that. You can see that things like the wages, they don't go up as much as the cost do, and that the costs outpace the wages. And that even when you look at things like college and how that was at one point a very easy mathematical equation, like, yes, go to college and make more money, easy. As the cost of college has gone up, it's slowly like, I don't know if that is as much of a slam dunk as it used to. Currently, the numbers still make sense, but even that's been closing. So you can see that the plan, generally speaking, is for everyone to work for, until they're maybe like 60, 65. So you have to be a lot more strategic when you're talking about retiring early in the FIRE movement. It's not just about, well, I'll save half of my salary, but it's like where I save it matters. And so we'll go into that a little bit more and you'll be able to see that. They had 500K as the value of the property, 350 is left on the mortgage. Currently, the home is free and clear. One of the things that is often overlooked that you do want to keep in mind is your medical expenses, however that looks. Sometimes we're not 100% sure how much it's going to cost, but we should at least put something in place to just recognize that there is going to be a healthcare cost before I can touch Medicare at 65 and things like that. And so that's normally where we'll just put an amount in there that we believe it'll be, and then we go back and we change it. But we do want to be thinking about those types of costs and things like that for their overall income. I believe they were making 160 combined, and that's what it was. And so you can see that Diego has a no, there was like no, yeah, that's right. Elena, let me move that over there to make it easier for me. So Elena's the one with the business. She has the marketing company. She has like a marketing agency. She helps people get their business like brick and mortars to get clients in the door. So if you had like what was it? Like if you had like a chiropractor or something like that, she would be the one that would set up like your ads and different things so that you can have people come in and get a free back alignment or something of that nature. And so she had her own business, 110 that was set aside in that. And then Diego, what was Diego again? Ooh, he's gonna kill me. I can't remember. I was a software engineer. I think that's what I forget. It was some type of engineer. And so then that was their combined salary that they both had. The plan was for them to be able to leave both their businesses at 50. So that'll be 7 years for Elena, and that will be 5 years for Diego. Social Security, we were planning on starting at 67 at their full retirement age. And so we had set that aside for them. As far as the goals in their retirement, right? So they both wanted to retire at 50, which, right, you don't see that number as often, but we all have numbers that we want to retire at. Their retirement expenses, we would expect them to be a little bit lower. That's very common when you're talking about the fire movement. I'm trying to manage my expenses so that I can maximize how much money I put aside. They didn't have any kids, and then they were able to lower their bills. And then we started placing some of the expenses that we would expect to have in retirement, because one of the things you got to do is you got to control for major expenses. So some things like that would be, would I need a new roof? Yes, most likely at some point in your retirement life, you'll need a new roof. So we should at least cover that in there. They also talked about getting a business later into retirement. That would be like a small side business, nothing too crazy. They would spend $20,000 on it. They expect the business to generate $1,000 a month. That would just kind of be an income stream and something that they could just do as a hobby. They would definitely let their love decide what type of business they're going to purchase, because it wasn't as much about the income. So that was going to be a supplemental income stream that they would have. They were talking about world traveling, and we are going to do that for about 10 years and then just reevaluate the plan. And so when you retire early, sometimes you're like, I think I want to do this for 5 years. Sometimes like I think I want to do it for 10 years. And we're not 100% sure how we want to do it. But we normally just will say, let's just assume it's a great 10 years. We go throughout the whole world. We can reevaluate. Do we want to go 15,000 a year still with inflation, or are we thinking maybe a smaller type of a trip? And so we'll just set that aside in there. And then we had the pickleball membership, which was like $2,400 a month. And then we had that go with inflation too. So that was those overall plans for them. As far as what they were contributing between all the accounts. They're maxing out their Roths when they were still able to, and then they were putting 24,000 into their brokerage and its 401k. So Diego was putting away 48,000 of his salary, and then Elena was putting away 12K plus the 18K. So she was doing 30K of her salary, and so they were doing a generally a higher percentage than you would see. And all that is necessary for you if you plan on retiring early. And so they were able to take care of all of that for themselves. And then you already saw that plan works as far as the ability to achieve the goals that we had said. We're going to be okay. We're going to have the money that's set aside for them. One of the big things that we had looked at, and I'm going to go through some of the income strategies, is when you talk about retiring early, how are you going to get the income without it being taxed? And so there is a handful of ways that you can do it. One of those would be Roth conversions, if you decided that that was a route that you wanted to take. And so what you would do is you would take the money in your 401k, and then you would roll it into your IRA, and your traditional IRA, and then that would not be a taxable event. And then from there, you'd roll it into your Roth account. And so you would pay taxes on that, but it wouldn't have the penalties attached to it. And because you're currently allowed to be able to do that. And when you're normally deciding at what point do I want to do that, we would normally look at any income years where our income is low. So you can see we're making the money that we're normally making. We're in kind of the 22% tax bracket. You can see that around 50, we start retiring, and then we have those low income years, but we're not doing as many Roth conversions. Then we start funding some of the trips as we're spending down some of the other accounts, and I'll go through that. And then you can see we started Social Security at 67. So you saw a bump in the income, and then we could continue going through that. And what you will see is we focused on investing in our tax-free account first, our taxable account second, and then the tax-deferred account because we're retiring early. So we don't want to have too much money that's sitting aside in your 401ks and your 403bs and things like that, because those are all going to be taxable income streams. As long as we're focusing on the taxable first and then the tax-free and the taxable, we'll either have no taxes on the money or we'll have capital gains taxes, and we're fine with that. It's a much more favorable tax rate. As far as the conversions, we just targeted a capital gains tax bracket of 0%. And so we're saying, look, if there is ever a time that our capital gains, because that's going to be a large part of our income source, is spending from our taxable account. So anytime our taxable gains are going to be like right around there, we're just going to go ahead and focus on that. If it doesn't push us in a higher tax. And so we're able to start moving the money so that they can keep spending it from the taxable account. And then they wouldn't have those other issues that you would be worried about. The larger the numbers is largely because they'll be retired for so long, but that's where you get that $14 million more in adjusted ending assets. You have 1.5 million less in taxable income, and then you'll end up having about 6.4 million less withdrawn, right? And so we're talking about retiring from like 50 to 90. So over 40 years, that's kind of how you get those larger numbers. Now, let me share with you my whiteboard and we'll go through. So even if you are someone who is retiring early, you still have the benefit of what I would say using the three bucket strategy. As you're well aware, that is my favorite approach. There are times that we'll use a different withdrawal strategy depending on what your retirement lifestyle and needs are. But for most people, this ends up working very well. And so the idea of the three buckets, why is that? I think that is the wrong color. There we go. We'll fix it. So the idea of the three buckets is I have my cash bucket, and that's basically going to be your safe bucket. I have my income bucket, and that's going to be my moderate bucket. And I have my growth bucket, and that's going to be my aggressive bucket. And the idea of these three buckets is it allows me the time that you generally need for these investments to work. And what ends up happening is as we get closer to retirement, the thought is, well, I know that I'm supposed to be less risky because I'm trying to maintain the growth that I have, which is true, right? That's true. But when you talk about things like inflation, and you're talking about making sure that you have the money that you need in retirement, sometimes we need a portion of it to continue growing, and that would be the focus. And so normally when you're looking at these three buckets, right, we're just right, going on averages. I know that as the economic climate changes, sometimes you can have a higher percentage of return. I recognize that. But the cash bucket, we're generally looking for like a 2% return. And then we're looking for probably somewhere around like a 4% return on the income bucket. And then we're probably looking for somewhere around like an 8% return on our growth bucket. And from there, we will align whatever the average portfolio return is, which ideally is going to at least keep up with inflation, right? Ideally. So that means we normally want to at least have a 3% average return so that way we maintain our purchasing power. Because you know the price of gas, how it goes up over time, the price of the food at the grocery store, right? A carton of eggs, I think it was like 67 cents in the 90s, and then it was like $1.50, and now it's like $4 and something. And so you can see that the price of things go up, and either you have to remove it from your retirement plan, like I can't afford eggs anymore, or you have to have some sort of a part of your income that is always keeping up with inflation. So that's the idea. Normally, when you're talking about things that are in your cash bucket, our cash bucket is normally going to be the things that we generally would think of. So you can literally have it in cash. You could also have this in some sort of a money market account, right? So those are normally going to be investments, generally speaking, that are 12 months or less. And then you'll have some of the monies in like a CD. So that's normally going to be my cash bucket. I've also seen people place the money in a high yield account where you're able to get higher than that 2%. But if you're able to have a high yield savings account of some kind, then normally you're able to place that in there. And so you'll place it in there. Then when you're talking about your moderate bucket, that's going to be my income bucket. And so this one depends on your risk tolerance, but I'll list the things that are normally in here, and then you can sort of think through what is going to be okay for you. Bonds is normally a pretty common one that normally works for most people, and I would normally consider your annuities in here, and that could be like your pension as well. So those are normally going to be in here as well. These are my investments that normally are going to keep up with inflation. Some people's don't, but a lot of people's do. I would have my tips in here: treasury, insurance, protected securities. So it's just as it sounds, or inflation, I'm sorry, inflation protected securities. I don't know why I said insurance. But the idea is if inflation goes up, the return goes up to at least keep up with inflation. So I'm maintaining that. And then dividends could be in here, but we're normally talking about kings and aristocrats. And all I mean when I say that is a dividend king is a dividend paying stock that has been paying a dividend for at least 50 years. And a dividend aristocrat, I believe, has been paying dividends for at least 25 years. And so you want to find, I would probably say, at least a dividend paying stock, a dividend paying company that has been at least paying them for 10 years for you to consider it kind of in that moderate range. But going for 20 years plus is obviously it's just going to be a more like a safer opportunity for you. But those are normally the ones we're talking about here. If you're talking about companies that haven't paid dividends less than 10 years, less than 5 years, we would consider that growth and aggressive. But you have the ability to focus on that. And you'll see that the returns are slightly a little bit lower because these are very large, stable companies, large market share, probably not going anywhere, right? Knock on wood. But we know that we're able to at least get that return high level. And so those would be the things that we would consider in there. Then when you talk about your growth, right? So your aggressive bucket, that would be your personal business. That could be your real estate, and we probably could put some REITs over here as well. But again, it would depend on the type of company that you're talking about. If you're talking about just your general ETFs or stocks, right, those would be there as well. And so we're really talking about how do I outpace inflation? Where is my growth going to be coming from? And so we can really go into anything. And then for some of you, you'll have your alternative investments. And when we talk about alternative investments, it just means alternative the normal stuff. So that could be someone that's really interested in crypto, or someone that's really interested in Bitcoin, or someone that really likes gold and other precious metals or emerging markets, where we're talking about things that are outside of the normal scope, but that would go in the growth bucket. You're trying to hit a home run, basically. And so normally the way that you would spread out your allocation, where you're going to get around that 3 to 5% of a return, or higher if you want, we would normally say, and so they're a little bit younger, so we probably would have had somewhere between 40% to 50% of their allocations here. And the idea of this bucket is I'm going to give myself at least a 5 year, but ideally I'm going to give myself a 10-year window to where if any of these assets are not performing well, I give myself the time for them to recover. So I don't have to sell in a down market. I don't have to sell my property when property values are down. I don't have to sell my stocks when the market is losing value. I have other buckets generating an income stream while I wait for it to return. And generally speaking, it returns. That over the time, over 10 years, the stock market right. It's going to go up. Even if you have a recession once every 10 years, that 10 years from the 9/11 is still going to be higher than 10 years. And right, just like 10 years from COVID is going to be better. 10 years from the Great Recession is going to be better. 10 years from the Great Depression is going to be better. And so that's the idea, is that if I give myself enough time, that these aggressive opportunities should recover. And that's why a lot of people don't when they retire, because they don't have any other income streams, because they haven't diversified them. And if you don't diversify them, then you probably wouldn't be invested in anything really in growth. And so the idea is I will sell when these are doing well, and then I will buy and I will purchase in my moderate bucket. And so over that time, and then your moderate bucket is normally going to be somewhere in that 3 to maybe like 7 years. And so what we're saying is that any of these might not perform well over a 3 to 7 year time frame, but I do expect them to recover as well. right? That is very unlikely that they're just going to be bad forever. And so anytime you're talking about interest rates and how they change and different things with the Fed, if you give yourself enough time, the way the economic cycles go, you should be able to get good interest rates offered to you again. Where we went through a pretty long period of time where the interest rates were really low because, right, we were trying to recover as far as the overall economy, but then they were really high when we had the high inflation. So if you were able to lock in a lot of those interest rates that were at like 6, 7, 8, 9%, then you can basically fulfill this bucket. And so then the idea is whenever I have my growth doing well, I buy my income. And when my income's doing well, I replenish my daily expenses. And so if you're someone that's in the fire movement, normally what we'll say is this is 1 to 3 years, but I would definitely focus on the 3 years. Just have 3 years of living expenses set aside because over a span of 3 years, mostly all of this should recover. And when it recovers, you then sell it to replenish your living expenses, but you don't have to worry about it. You've given yourself the window room, you have the multiple streams of income. So that way you're not going to take the losses, as in locking them in from selling the investments. So normally 1 to 3 years of living expenses that's sitting here. And so for most people, this is probably going to be somewhere around, I would say like 10 to 30% of your portfolio. And then this one's probably going to be somewhere around 20 to 40% of your portfolio. And then you would see what the average portfolio return ends up being. And from that, we could put the plan together. And then ultimately, you decide how am I going to be able to take my money and put it in the places that I need to. And when we're talking about people who are in the fire movement, like I said, it requires you to have money that's outside of Uncle Sam penalizing you for 59 and a half because you basically have to start building your bridge. So normally what we talk about is if you're retiring at 60, we have to build a bridge to get you to whatever you want to take, Social Security and Medicare. So Medicare is 65. So put a 5-year bridge. How are we going to pay for our health expenses? Are we going to use a health savings account? Are we going to go on the Affordable Care Act exchanges? Are we going to work part-time somewhere that just so that we can have some sort of health benefits? Those would be the things that we would think about and talk about from a health planning perspective. If you're starting at 50, it just expands the length of time and the number of things we have to consider. We have to consider how am I going to have my health expenses covered over a 15-year span? And then also, what am I going to do for that 9.5, that 10 years? Because, right, I can't touch it without being penalized till 59.5. So where is my income going to come from over that 10 years so that I don't have to pay any of these penalties? And so that's normally what I'm talking about when I say a bridge for getting you your bridge from here to there. So let me see what you got. Hopefully that makes sense. Ronald, yes, my friend. Hey, how are you? It says the 3 bucket snare is definitely must. I appreciate that. I always start by saying, it's my favorite. I recognize it's not everyone's favorite, right? It's not everyone's favorite, but I like it a lot. I think it's very versatile and it really gives you the opportunity to ebb and flow. Now it's very okay for someone that's like, Dre, I have all the money that I'll ever need and I'll never have to worry about it. So I don't have to be that efficient with my investments. I can just focus on safe investments. And we totally would. Right. It's really just that's the overall idea is like, well, this would be one of the more efficient ways that gives you peace of mind of knowing as long as we don't have a 3-year recession, I should be able to maintain my lifestyle while I wait for the market to recover or while I wait for my home prices to rebound or whatever it is that your investments are that ebb and flow with a certain market. Even if you're talking about the current environment, like someone with a business and you're dealing with all the economic uncertainty, the idea is that we should have a little bit more uncertainty a little more certainty as each year goes by. That we'll know whatever that looks like as far as if there's tariffs in this country, as far as if there's embargoes and you can't trade with this country, all that stuff should become clear as each year goes by. And then we're able to start putting the plans in place of how we want to adjust and make that move. So I definitely agree with that. So let me go back to this one. So that's ultimately right. So we talked about the investments, and then we also talked about the idea of taxes, because taxes is definitely one of the things that you want to think about when you're talking about being at that younger age. And so we had the money, 1.4 million we had set aside, and then we're able to have the investments. And as we mentioned, you'll find that oftentimes if you're retiring early and you're working with someone that's mentioned it to you, you have less money in your tax deferred accounts than other people, right? This one is almost a 50-50, where they have 50% of their money inside of a tax deferred account, and they have 50% of the money in a taxable and tax-free account. And that ends up working pretty well. They're very close to the 60-40 as far as the investments. with the three bucket strategy that works pretty good for them too. And so we're able to take advantage of that for them as well. And then you can see that what we ended up doing for their plan, because we already were able to have the income to be able to get rid of the debt, we just maintained that. And then we added the joint business where we're saying around 52, we're going to start looking into that. And that business would just generate 1,000 a month is what we're saying. So we kept it pretty conservative, and because it was more of an enjoyment thing. And so that was why we thought about that. Now, the last thing I did want to show you, and often when we're talking about the plans, so goals. We talk a decent amount of time when you're talking about healthcare expenses, and then I do mention long-term care for you guys because it is something that we do normally just like to consider. And so long-term care, you're normally going to have three choices of how you want to have that taken care of, right? So normally you're going to either self-fund it, you're going to get some sort of insurance policy, and then you have and then you have the three choices of how you want to have it administered. Do you want people to come to your house, home health aid? Do you want to have assisted living where you visit someone? It's more like physical therapy every so often, or would you like to have it as like a nursing home where it's like 24/7 care? And then just depending on each of our lives, that's ultimately how we decide. And it's important to always at least know what that does to the plan, right? That's kind of my thoughts on that. It's important to at least know what it does to the plan. And then we can make the adjustments as far as what we eat, how active we are, but it's important to know. And so, based off of what it currently is, what we did is we added and we said, hey, $75,000 a year is currently the average for long term care. And based off of that, we know that 7 out of 10 people 65 and older will have at least one long term care episode. And it's on average 3 years, not 3 years consistently, but 6 months here, 6 months there, things like that. Well, based on that, we normally would say, all right, well, what happens if the last 2 years of the plan has it? And one of the important things to keep in mind is because inflation, and you guys know healthcare costs goes up higher than normal inflation, right? Healthcare and like college outpace normal inflation. And so when you're just talking about the cost of things going up and you say about 3% every year, that means about every 20 years, the cost doubles. And so what we're saying is if we are, so right, this person, they're 50, when so they're like 45 now. So what we're saying is what $75,000 right now, when they're 65, would be $150,000 if it was just the normal inflation, just the normal 3%. But as we just mentioned, healthcare is a little bit higher. And so that basically means a couple things. One is ideally we'll go ahead, if we're going to set the money aside, we will just set it aside now. So that way we don't have to actually find $150,000. We just have the 75 and then we allow it to grow with the market. Right, that would be the ideal situation because it's either we work or the money works, right? Those are the two things that have to work. And so if I'm able to have it set aside now, then I don't even have to worry about it. When it doubles in price, it doesn't matter because I have investments that have doubled as well, even if it's just the normal inflation upkeep investments. And so that's where we're normally going to be saying that. Now, if you were someone that said, hey, I think I would lean towards the long-term care insurance, that's normally about, I think it's on average like $150 a month. And that gives you about the average of like $200,000 as far as the bucket. And then that normally covers the average long-term care over someone's life. And so you would then be looking around this age. So normally like 45 to 55, definitely before 60 for most people. And whether we start getting in the shape that we need to get approved at 45 and we apply at 50, or we get in the shape and approval that we need at 50 to apply at 55, we'll normally just start putting those plans in motion. We're like, I want to get approved, I want to set it up, or I just want to fund it on my own. It's up to you, right? It's kind of however you want to look at it. But we do want to be thinking about these things when we're making those decisions. All right. And so that is the absolute last thing. And so you can see how the plan ends up working and the type of things that you would need to consider from your investments and from your lifestyle and being able to fund your lifestyle. And I definitely encourage you all, whenever you make a plan, I do think it's always good to put a placeholder for something where you're like, I think I might be interested in golfing. Sure. Now I would say, how much is a golf membership? Like, oh, well, I don't think I want to golf that much. Okay, cool. How much is it for a round? Well, no, it's like $50. All right, cool. And so how much for the clubs, right? Because we can't just be out there doing nothing. And then, we'll look at clubs and it'll be like a couple $100. We'll say, all right, well, so the bare minimum, say a couple $100 for clubs, maybe $100 to get some shoes. You got to have a couple outfits so that you look like a nice golfer out there. So we'll say another couple $100 for that. and then we'll say like 100 a month. We'll say you go like twice a month, right? So you just go out there and golf. All right, well, that's like $2,000, right? So then we would just need to have that. We'd say that $2,000 golfing. And then it's just a part of the plan. If you use it on something else, that's great. If you don't use it there, that's fine. If you use it on it, it's good too. But oftentimes, remember that when you talk about happiness in retirement, it's about how we really happiness, at least my opinion, happiness in all of life is how we spend our time. So we spend our time on things of pleasure and purpose. And so pleasure is like me eating a donut. Ooh, man, I'm smiling thinking about it. But then purpose might be me going on like a jog. I'm healthy. I'm trying to do my marathon trainings, and I want to be around for my kids, right? So purpose. And then sometimes we have a little bit of both, right? So mowing the yard for me gives me pleasure and purpose. I like my yard to look nice, but then I also like to be active and outside. And so that gives me pleasure and purpose, right? We want to be able to mix our life with a mixture of all these things. And so that's normally what we talk about when we talk about being happy. There's like 8 categories, and I probably can show it to you, and then I'll let you all go. I won't bore you too much, but there's basically like 8 categories when I talk about the wheel of happiness. And it's everything from who I spend my time with as far as like my career, my finances, and the experiences and things like that that we have. And then ultimately we'll measure 1 to 5. One being I'm messing up, 5 being man, it gets no better. And depending on how you rate yourself on these different categories, you would then ultimately decide, how do I want to adjust my time so that I can enjoy my retirement? Right? Do you like hanging out with people? Do you like doing that stuff? Because you might be like, no, Andre, I don't like doing that stuff. Yeah, right. But I got you. All right. So I found it. I'm going to show it to you real quick. It comes from my workbook, and I'm working on some stuff, and I am going to share it with you just so you know. I am going to share it with you. But thank you, my friend Ron. All right. So I'm going to share the screen with you again. Change it to that. All right. This is something that I do end up showing people, right? And so I call it my beginning of happiness. We just go through it. 5 pure joy, what not so much. Our physical, mental health, business, career, life, leisure, spiritual, friends, family, finances, contribution, and life purpose and romance, right? We just go through those, and you can go through them too. And then the idea is you want to have a wheel. So you want them all to kind of have the same number, ideally. Some things don't matter as much, and that's totally cool. So ideally what you'll say is, all right, well, I feel a 5 on everything. You have a nice round wheel and you're moving and grooving. But if you have like a 1 on something, then you're like, my wheel isn't moving very well. And so normally when we're talking about ways to spend your time, we'll notice wherever you have a 5, you just feel really good about how much time you spend on that, right? So my family's probably like a 5 for me. I spend a ton of time with them. And so that's it. My lifestyle and leisure, so I put them together because I'm not someone who likes leisure. That stresses me. Just kind of sitting around, it really does. I like to work. I appreciate the grind, and I just enjoy growth. I enjoy growth spiritually. I enjoy growth mentally, economic. I just enjoy the idea of growing and learning. So for me, that's why I kind of bucket them together. And so I actually feel pretty good about that. And then spiritual and personal, right? So everything from my faith to the time that I spend volunteering and helping kids and different things. And then my wife would probably say my romance is probably where we need to go on more date nights. And so I recognize that. And so we do go more than we used to, but not quite enough. So I recognize both of that. And then the physical and mental health, I'm working on that as far as my overall Spartan training and different things like that. And so you really just kind of go through this and you really just think through it. Nothing to be too crazy about, but just really just to kind of think through it and be like, yeah, you know what? I maybe should spend a little bit more time there. Maybe I am neglecting that a little bit. And so it just kind of starts the conversation for you. All right. And then that's going to be it. Let's see here. Rana. Of course, my friend. Thank you for the compliment. Great presentation as usual. I appreciate that. All right, my friends. That is it. So that is your plan as far as you want to retire early. And really, if you just want to retire, these are things you look at. It just slightly changes some of the decisions that you'd make. As always, I'm Dre Griggs with the Sitting Wisdom. I'm thankful for the time, and be on the lookout. I'm putting something together for you all that I think you'll be super excited by. And as always, let's stay safe and enjoy